I would like to open up this second panel, which is, of course, a great deal different in conception than the first. Intentionally speaking, we go from the international community and what they can and cannot do and what they've done, to the unique challenges confronted by some of the unique countries of our region, and in this case in particular we'll be looking at the nitty-gritty problems in Croatia and in Macedonia, but we'll also be covering the other countries. The other speakers, especially Serbia, will be discussed, I think, in the other two as well. So we'll hear about the special problems. I might also add, not to waste too much time, that it's a particular pleasure to chair this conference because it's made up of almost exclusively of people who have been scholars here at the Wilson Center, with the exception of the gentleman to my right, who is almost an honorary member anyway. But Ivan and Islam and Milica have all been. Actually, Ivan and Milica are currently here as public policy scholars, and Islam was here just following his stint in the NSC at Macedonia, about 4 or 5 years ago. So if you don't like what they say, blame the Wilson Center. That's what we can say. And so we'll open it up. Now we'll go, again, 15 minutes each, as Sam had said, and we'll go in order. And so the first speaker is Professor Gordon Bardos of the Harriman Institute of Columbia University. And he'll be giving you the domestic, historical, and structural obstacles to the Western Balkan countries' EU accession aspirations.
Okay. Let's see, are we loaded up already, the PowerPoint? I'm sorry, I'm so bad with technology. I want to start off by thanking Marty and Nita for the invitation and the Wilson Center for organizing this. It's encouraging to see that so many people are still interested and focused on Southeastern Europe. So thank you again for inviting me. I want to start off by asking a provocative question. When we think about the Western Balkan countries' future accession to the European Union, are we focusing on the wrong things? Much of the debate on this topic is focused on two issues. The first set of issues focuses on problems within the EU itself, such as enlargement fatigue and absorption capacity, after the EU accepted 12 new members in 2004 and 2007. These problems bring up the question of whether the EU can institutionally accommodate the accession of new members at this time, as well as whether both elite and public opinion in the EU will support a further near-term enlargement. The second set of issues focuses on whether the Western Balkan countries are doing enough to fulfill the requirements for joining the Union. Here the questions being asked are whether there is enough political will and commitment within the Western Balkan countries to push through, adopt, and implement the reforms necessary for the various countries in Southeastern Europe to satisfy EU accession requirements, and in addition to political will, whether the Western Balkan countries have the political and administrative capacity to be good EU members. I want to suggest an unfortunate possibility that the Western Balkan countries, for a variety of historical and structural reasons, which will be discussed further below, may simply be incapable or unable to satisfy the requirements for EU membership. This, of course, raises two important questions for the EU. Namely, what are the political, economic, and social consequences of leaving the Western Balkan countries outside of the Union? And if these consequences are too great, does the EU need to come up with a new or modified accession mechanism for the countries of Southeastern Europe? Now, according to a number of indicators, there's been a noticeable backsliding in terms of political and economic reform in Southeastern Europe over the past few years. Let me go through a few indications of this. If we take a look at Freedom House's Nations in Transit Democracy ratings over the past, since 2003, you can see steady progress was being made from 2003 to 2005 across the region. In 2006, we started seeing some problems. The numbers in red all indicate downgraded scores. So it started with Kosovo in 2006, but a lot of problems throughout the region in 2007 and into 2008. And we're going to see the same story from a variety of perspective. Transparency International, again, we're starting to see some problems in 2008. The World Bank's Ease of Doing Business report showing considerable problems over the past couple of years. And finally, Standard & Poor's sovereign credit ratings. All the countries in the region are showing a worsening situation. Othon had some really interesting information about the decreases in FDI inflows that are coming into the region this year. I think it's safe to assume that as the economic situation deteriorates in southeastern Europe, that things are going to continue to get worse, which is obviously going to have a lot of political implications for the region. Let me go back up. Now, it should be noted that this backsliding has taken place during a time at which southeastern Europe has received an almost unprecedented amount of international attention and foreign aid. Although it's impossible to calculate with any precision the exact amount of financial aid devoted to the region in the past 2 decades, it seems clear that upwards of $100 billion, and maybe somewhere on the order of $200 billion, has been directed towards the Western Balkans by various foreign governments and international institutions and agencies. Needless to say, given the current global financial crisis, it's unlikely that southeastern Europe is likely to see these amounts of foreign assistance at any time again in the near future. These facts in turn suggest that the policy of EU conditionality has reached the limits of its usefulness as a tool for promoting reform in southeastern Europe. If this is so, then why? I would offer 2 possible answers. First, as the promise of foreseeable EU accession for the Western Balkan countries has receded further and further into the distance, it's become less and less attractive for Balkan politicians to make the difficult and politically costly decisions necessary to adopt, and even more importantly, to really implement various EU-mandated reforms. I want to pick up on something, sorry about that. Wade Jacoby mentioned something about the priest and the penitent approach to southeastern Europe being used by the European Union. I'm going to pick up on that. Milica Delevic wrote a very good paper on regional integration in the Western Balkans recently. And she captured this problem very well in a well-chosen anecdote she lifted from the B92 website. As one commentator there noted, the EU has a church-like approach to the countries of southeastern Europe, insofar as, and I quote, countries in the region are expected to behave the way the EU tells them, to admit their past mistakes, but in the end, the message is that no benefits come in this life. This viewpoint is especially true of politicians who are understandably hesitant to commit to unpopular political and economic reforms for the sake of a reward that will only, and maybe, come 2 or 3 electoral cycles down the line. Perhaps more importantly, however, and here I really come to the point of my own presentation, is that for a variety of historical and structural reasons, there's a strong likelihood that several of the Western Balkan countries simply will not, even given the requisite amount of political will, be able to fulfill the requirements of EU integration. The historical reasons for this are quite clear. The countries that entered the EU in 2004 and 2007 had enjoyed an interlude of some 60 years since the last time they had experienced major violence or warfare on their territory. By contrast, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, and Serbia, and to a lesser extent Macedonia, experienced large-scale military conflict only 10 to 15 years ago. We should not underestimate the problems this poses in terms of the amount of energy that has to be devoted to political reconciliation, rebuilding trust in governing institutions, and even in rebuilding basic physical and economic infrastructure. Kosovo, of course, is a prime example of this. How serious can a discussion of the EU accession plans be for a region which does not even have a steady and reliable source of electricity at this time? As Marie-Janine Kalick has argued, the Western Balkans find themselves in a much less favorable position than the Central and East European states in the pre-accession phase. The former face a number of constitutional and political uncertainties following a decade of war and destruction. They lack the institutional administrative capacity to use EU instruments properly, and neither the political determination nor the substantial economic growth necessary to underpin the reform processes are in place. Similarly, the countries that joined the Union in 2004 and 2007 were not burdened by such legacies of war as the need to cooperate with the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the ICTY. We all know, of course, the difficulties Croatia and Serbia have had in trying to live up to their commitments to cooperate with the ICTY. And that it is, in fact, this issue which has held up the EU's willingness to ratify Serbia's Stabilization and Association Agreement for well over a year now. Reviewing the utility of imposing these types of obstacles upon the countries of the region should first of all be reconsidered simply due to common sense, I would argue. While the morality of insisting on the surrender of indicted war criminals is unassailable, the strategic logic of holding entire countries hostage to the fate of a few men is clearly counterproductive. Consider, for instance, what one politician recently said about this kind of problem. This is a time for reflection, not retribution. We have been through a dark and painful chapter in our history. Nothing will be gained by spending our time and energy laying blame for the past. Now, this wasn't said by somebody in Belgrade or by somebody in Zagreb or by somebody in Bosnia. This was said by President Barack Obama just a few weeks ago with regard to the problems in Guantanamo and other places. Now, apart from these historical problems and the obstacles imposed by EU conditionality, perhaps an even more difficult problem the Western Balkan countries have to deal with is structural, i.e., the complications that ethnic heterogeneity and the social divisions it creates imposes upon the political decision-making process in countries such as Bosnia, Kosovo, and Macedonia, and to lesser extents, Montenegro and Serbia as well. A large body of political science literature going back to John Stuart Mill has argued that ethnically homogeneous countries have an advantage in terms of both how the political process in their countries works and in terms of economic performance over ethnically heterogeneous countries. I've got a few classic statements on this from political economy, but I'm not going to go through them all. Just suffice it to say that we can look at examples from all over the world, from Asia, Africa, and Eastern Europe. And we've consistently seen that the political decision-making process and consequently the determination of such things as the provision and distribution of public goods and the loyalty of various groups to the state are all easier and more effective in states that have higher levels of ethnic homogeneity. This theoretical standpoint has been amply borne out in post-1989 East Central Europe, where more ethnically homogeneous states have enjoyed considerably more success in adopting the political, legal, and economic reforms required for EU accession than the more ethnically heterogeneous ones. In large part, this stems from the greater popular legitimacy mono-ethnic states in the region enjoy compared to the more heterogeneous ones. For instance, in the 12 countries that joined the EU in 2004 and 2007, what I would call the state nations percentage of the population was 82.5%. By way of comparison, this table shows what the similar percentages are for 3 of the countries in the Western Balkans. So the new EU member average for the countries that joined in 2004 and 2007 was 82.5%. We see the similar number for Bosnia is 48. The similar number for Macedonia is 64. However, that number is probably declining because of differences in demographic birth rates between different ethnic groups. And the similar number for Montenegro is 43%. Evidence and manifestations of how these ethnic and social divisions, as well as the problems imposed by outside conditionality, play out in real life are easy to see. Today, Bosnia and Herzegovina is debating the same issues, such as the division of authorities between the central and regional governments and the distribution of power between different ethnic groups, that it was debating almost 20 years ago. The Bosnian parliament elected in 2006 had only managed to pass 22 laws by December of 2008. And an analysis by a Sarajevo NGO recently estimated that at such a rate, it will take that body 50 years to pass all the legislation needed for EU accession. Serbia, over the past several years, partly due to problems with the ICTY, partly due to problems over Kosovo and everything else that Serbia's had to deal with, has had to deal with the assassination of a prime minister, a 2-month-long state of emergency, 3 failed attempts to elect a president, and the fall or replacement of 4 governments in 6 years. Macedonia barely avoided an all-out inter-ethnic civil war in 2000 and 2001, and more recently, one of the main parties in the country boycotted parliament for much of 2006 and 2007, making it impossible to pass legislation, various pieces of legislation needed for EU accession. Last month, a prominent Albanian politician suggested the possibility that Macedonia needs to be reorganized along federal lines, or reorganized into a federal state. And if this comes to pass, it will virtually guarantee that political energies and emotions in Macedonia over the next few years will be overwhelmed by debates over the very nature of the Macedonian state, rather than over the political and economic reforms needed for EU accession. And we all know the consequences of the continuing dispute between Athens and Skopje over the name issue. Now, to conclude, given the preceding analysis, if the policy of EU conditionality has reached the limits of its effectiveness, and the countries of the Western Balkans are structurally incapable of satisfying requirements for EU accession, then Brussels has a choice to make. Either it calculates the pros and cons of simply leaving the Western Balkans outside the Union, or it comes up with a new and modified accession mechanism to let the Western Balkan countries in within a foreseeable period. Many European politicians understand the consequences of leaving the Balkans outside of the Union are simply too great to bear. As Carl Bildt, one of Europe's most experienced Balkan hands, has noted, if Europe, and I quote, takes away the guiding beacon which has guided the reform policies of the region for the past years, then instead of the magnet of European integration, we might well go back to seeing the policies of the region driven by the fears and prejudices of nationalism. To this, one could add a more practical argument in favor of quicker EU accession for the Western Balkan countries. If conditions in southeastern Europe continue to deteriorate, then the EU and much of the international community would simply have wasted the tens of billions of dollars they have already invested in the region. The choice for the EU is whether it will develop innovative strategies for integrating the Western Balkans into the Union, or whether it will allow the region to stagnate and risk the inevitable backsliding, which we've already gone over, in which the region would again be characterized by nationalist conflicts and become a safe haven for organized crime syndicates and various types of religious and nationalist extremists, and a perpetual source of illegal immigrants flowing westwards into the Union itself. Someone who's probably familiar to most of you here in this audience, he's frequently here, he's got a very good line about this. Jacques Klein put it very well one time when he said that for the EU, they have the choice of either letting the Western Balkan countries into the EU, or the Western Balkan countries will go into the EU on their own, one person at a time. And I think he was very right about that. There's one last thing just to be noted sort of on the grand historical scale of everything. This is a point that's been made very often by lots of different people, is that this is really kind of a unique historical moment in southeastern Europe, insofar as the region's not divided between various empires and between various power blocks. Everybody in southeastern Europe basically wants the same thing. They want to join the EU and they want to join the NATO. So it really is kind of a unique historical opportunity both to unite the Balkans and to unite Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Our next speaker is Professor Ivan Grdesic, Professor of Political Science at the University of Zagreb and a current, as I said before, public policy scholar here. And I might add that he was the ambassador of Croatia here in the United States from 2000 to 2004, and he was also a Fulbright visiting professor at Indiana University, which some of us know pretty well here, and Virginia Tech.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning. I guess it is still good morning. It's hard to follow after Gordon's explanation, and this is why I always argue that the regional travel to Europe should be regatta type and not a convoy type. So to distinguish really when you talk about West Balkans, then you really have to put tables broke down by the countries to see what is this all about. But let me go back to my story. First, I wrote a nice long paper. I always tell myself this is nice and long, but and I will say at the beginning what I wrote the last, that it is of utmost historical importance for Croatia, and I will speak for Croatia now, to join Europe or to Europeanize itself. So the Europeanization process goes on, and when we are using metaphors of travel, it's not so much important that Croatia goes to Europe. It's important that Europe comes to Croatia, that we'll live on our plains, on our islands, on our shores the way we would like, or by the standards or measures of European neighbors. I think it is important because it will provide opportunity to stabilize our democratic institution, to strengthen our market opportunities, to strengthen our civil society, and to provide more ways and more opportunities to create our own future, being a member or being a part of the European Union than being outside on the margins of that civilization, I would say. It's not so much about the seats and the number of the votes. It's about the way of living and production and how we create our future. So I'm very pro-European, even if I'm very critical of what we are doing on the way to Europe. And I think it's really, as Gordon said, a historical opportunity. It's probably a historical opportunity that cannot be done today, and it's probably need time. And I will talk about this a little bit. Croatia's strategy in the last 18 years, and I'm talking about the detour in a way, because it took a long while, not only because of the war, but because of other consequences that we had and experienced. It's been now almost 18 years. The new generation will vote in the next elections that was born in an independent country. They will be 18, 19 years old in 2011 when they will have a right to vote for the first time. So it's been a while, and of course for the country it's not much, but for us, the citizens of the country, it's quite a lot. So that strategy, especially from 2000, has been sort of a fast track. Let's join the European Union on a fast track. And Prime Minister Sanader talks about the fifth speed of driving to European institutions, or then the opposition leader said, well, you know, the good new cars, they have 6 speeds, so you better shift to the 6th speed. But this notion of fast approach has been driving the not only this government, but the previous governments too, that it has to be quick. Well, there are consequences to this. Consequences on both sides, on the European side and on this side. First, what it really means is that we have to do incremental reforms only that are required, those that are benchmarked, and they may be more benchmarks today for Croatia than it was before. But still, the idea of reform that's threshold, just enough that we can do it quickly under the requirements that were imposed to us. So it's really not about Europeanization of the country, or bringing the Europe to Croatia. It's satisfying the criteria that were put down in the negotiation process, or on that complicated, long-term, actually, dictation process. When I was here in Washington, the Austrian ambassador told me, well, listen, this is not a negotiation process. Just learn to write quickly down what they are telling you to do, because you're actually adopting a common sea of the rules and laws, and you're not negotiating. You're only comparing notes if your numbers are similar to their numbers, and if they're not, what you have to do to improve your numbers. So this is not really, it's a euphemism. It's really a political mask that we are talking about, negotiating the chapters. So the idea of high speed has proved to be wrong. 18 years, almost a whole generation, an adult person life is in the question in that whole speed. On the other hand, coming on a fast track to European Union has its consequences. The country is opened, and we've seen it already even without being a full member, but being a candidate with the Stabilization and Association Agreement, that country is open to all kinds of pressures, economic, political, cultural. Many people are not ready, and they're not ready because they're not informed. They don't have capacity and strength, capital to fight British citizens in competing for the Adriatic properties. They're just not ready to be exposed to European pressures in a way that will happen. So that speed has its long-term consequences on domestic front. So having said that, let me see what are these obstacles, even on that high-speed, fast-track approach. And I'll go back to the traveling metaphor here, and again, the one that's been already mentioned, the carrot and the horse thing. It is sort of a carrot and a horse. And my question here that I would like to share with you is, so what about the carrot? Is this carrot really a fresh and juicy still that we are following? And what about the horse? Is he tired enough to follow that carrot, or they're just going to get some other food? Well, I would like to see the carrot, not just the carrot in one particular element in that salad, but the garden in front of that horse, and certainly a happy and a strong horse in that sense. But I don't think that may happen in a fast-track, politicized approach that we are experiencing now in the country, in which the process is basically process burdened by political opportunism on both sides. This is not the way to bring the country and society into the new, dramatically, profoundly changed situation. Europeanization for Croatia, as I see it, is an ongoing process of innovation of everything that we lived before, and moving into the way that we haven't learned, and it will take time. And I may sound a little bit optimistic, but on the long run, this is what I wanted to say. What I'm for is something that has to be considered very, very strongly. Let me go back quickly to some of the issues that we see. About the carrot, we heard in very, very informatively and in a bit good arguments how the carrot looks right now. It's not really a very attractive carrot, and it doesn't behave in a way that we would like the carrot to behave. It's not very friendly during not very compassionate even to its own members during this financial and economic crisis, and even less to the candidate countries. We've seen that through the referendum on constitutional documents, that European citizens don't like the carrot anymore, so they won't like to change things a little bit. So it spills over to other societies, and especially to the candidate societies, to perceive it differently than before. That euphoric optimism of return to Europe, it's not so strong as it used to be. We've seen the European countries, again mentioned already, they do not behave in a very European way. The Slovenian blackmail of Croatia, just because it's a member, they can do things that they like, probably not. So all of that, and in the same time, European Union having a very lukewarm approach to the situation, looking for a compromise that's really no need for it. There is a clear alternative how to resolve Slovenian and Croatian dispute that have been resolved for many, many years before regarding borders on a sea or on a land. There are international law institutions that can handle that, and this is probably why they have been invented. So that carrot is not so attractive anymore as it used to be. On the other side, the horse is really tired. You know, it's difficult to talk about the country as a horse, but you know, in the image of a Kentucky Derby, you may appreciate what I'm talking about, the beauties of the animal itself. The European process for the local democratic parties is not very attractive one in terms, it doesn't bring any votes. Success on European process has a very limited influence on getting more votes. Prime Minister Račan, who was actually here talking in 2002, didn't win or actually lost the elections, and brought Croatia into the candidacy position. So the local voting body that looks at the Europe success of the country sort of as a default. It's something that has to be done. There is no difference. Everybody is doing it. All the parties are on the same track. So there is really no issue position that may be different for parties on the left, on the right. Even the radical right parties are embracing the European idea because they see it's more costly if they don't than if they do. Accession process is elite-driven on both sides. It is something that does not appeal to the general idea of democratic process. It's elite-driven on our side. It's elite-driven on the European side. It has been perceived as public as handshakes, travels, airports, expensive hotels, lunches and statements, flags and pralinas, or whatever you can imagine. The public perception of European negotiation process is what you see on the screen, and there is nothing else that is told to them. So the level of knowledge, the level of information, and sort of a public participation in this issue is very limited. The major idea that we share, what is Europeanization all about, that we may go to IKEA in Graz and take our furniture home without stopping at the customs, which is actually a great thing. Imagine that you go to North Virginia to your IKEA store and you have to declare your chair when you're entering the DC border. So this is something that Croats will experience, but right now they look at the Europeanization process in a stereotyped, highly diplomatic activity of a few people, and it's not really that Croatia will join European Union, as I said, in Brussels, expensive lobbies and hotels. It will join Europe on its shores, on its plains, in city halls at home. When we at home become prime ministers and other in terms of their Europeanization or European standing and policy. So that process is, or the diplomatic or public policy information drive, it's something to desire. We heard already about the capacity of a country, of that horse, proverbial or not, is weakened. We see that our administrative capacity to learn and what is called a policy learning or policy in diffusion, it's limited. Capacity of the city, of a civic servants or our state democracy, state administration and public administration is not yet enough strong in terms of its knowledge and its independence. Our civic service is still politics-oriented and not policy-oriented. There's still too much loyalties to political leaders and too much political intervention in the public administration process. So transferring policy, expertise, evaluation, impact assessment, and all of these things that I'm teaching my kids is something that's still in front of us. Then there is an issue of corruption, of course, that has been mentioned, the high perception of corruption in the country. It's something that it's tied to our judiciary situation that European Union has objected continuously. Again, this is a process that will take time. This is not something that you can change by political will. Well, tomorrow you will not be a corrupt judge, you will be a great judge that's objective and politically independent and have all the knowledge and the strength of expert. There is a long way to go for the servants in the judiciary, in the legal officers of the courts to adopt the values and knowledge and traditions that are not corrupt, that are not politically oriented, that they will see their future in their profession, not in the profession of others, namely politicians. So this is something that, again, will take time, and it's not a benchmark situation that you can do. Well, we check now, there's no corruption, or it's controllable, or it's called lobbying now. Something that how I'm doing the time.
1 or 2 minutes.
Only 2 minutes? Okay. Well, in that chapters that we have talked about, there's 33 for Croatia chapters. 7 have been what they call opened and provisionally closed. This provisionally I like the most because they can be opened again. So there is a long way to go. And again, in the very short period of time, government hopes that it will do it until the next election so that they can reap the benefits of that success. I don't think that this will happen or that the benefits will happen for the electoral success. There are things that in these 3 chapters I would like to, on the end, take out and just show which are the most difficult ones. I will say that agriculture, politically and financially difficult. Agriculture is probably the most difficult thing, economically, socially, and politically. To move the Croatian agriculture to European type of agriculture will, first of all, demand enlarging of the private property of the farmers. The farmer units are small, family, traditionally divided units that are not competitive. So this has to move into what's called organizations for production in European terminology. And so enlargement would probably have a strong and a long-term consequences on the structure of our agricultural population, peasants, the numbers, the types, how they work and produce, how they stay on the land or not, who are the owners, and that will be of the major consequence on the long run. The change of the subsidies, the marketization, the choice what we are going to do within European agriculture policy is something that's in front of us. And it's very expensive, and it needs political leadership, which I think it's lacking here, because the Croatian Peasant Party, today's coalition partner, probably the future's coalition partner, has difficulty envisioning their political future with a changed agriculture situation. This will be a major disconnect. How the new environment in agriculture will work with today's political leadership for that agriculture, and how that will proceed. Fishing and fisheries is something that's important for Croatia, and liberalization of the fishing business in Adriatic will probably have devastating consequences on the fish, on the horse that's in the sea. So I think this is something that we have to look very, very strongly and hard-nosed how to prevent overfishing of the Adriatic Sea, basically by Italians, let's be frank, because our fishing fleet is weak, and it's not adequate to overfish, thank God. But Italians, they can overfish if they're allowed to. So combining the protection of environment and the sea, and in the same time allowing economic freedom on the seas, will be a major challenge. The other one is environment. This is a nice one, but a very expensive one. To reach the standards of European Union in environmental protection is very expensive. Thank God, Croatia is clean and green country, and if you want to keep it, we would like to have European standards, but it will take enormous financial effort to do all what is required in terms of providing not only regulation, but also the management of that environment and the management of the waste and facilities to manage the environment and waste in the country. So this is something that is sort of politically free, but is prohibitively expensive on a short term. So it is about time when I start talking about the fast track. I'm very pro-European. I would like to see my kids going back. My son is studying here, and when I asked him, are you coming back from the United States back home? He said, yes, I may be teaching maybe in Graz or in Amsterdam. Wherever they speak English will be my home. Thinking that Croatia is not his home only in the next 5 or 10 years. I hope it will be sooner that he will come back and do his work at home. But again, that perspective of historical importance is now facing a short-term policy measures. We are talking always about the speed, benchmarking on both sides. Nobody is talking about society and about people and how they will adopt. I would basically, in that term, in the name of the title of this conference, say, well, My approach to innovative policy, we just forget the benchmarking and let these people come in and help them out once they're in, because this is the only way that you can really do it. It reminds me, and I will conclude this, with Albania. Albania is never ready and will never be ready to be a NATO member. It's impossible, but it is a NATO member, and it will be stronger and better NATO member once it's inside than outside. Our politicians like to speak that this is not for them, meaning for Olli Rehn or Barroso or these guys. It's for us. Well, it's true, but this political mantra on the left and the right is actually emptied of its energy, what mantra is all about. The inspiration, the vision, the strength of our sort of inside of us, that I can be a member of the Union in Croatia, not in Brussels hotels. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, before I introduce Islam, I have to acknowledge that I've made a grave error, and I neglected to announce that at the start of this panel, these proceedings were being simultaneously webcast, and to invite the listeners, such as they are, to our session. And so I do this now, 45 minutes late. Better late than never. But and now we'll proceed with Islam. Yusufi, who's founder of the Analytica think tank in foreign policy think tank in Skopje in Macedonia, and who before that served as deputy national security advisor to the president of Macedonia and other issues. He'll be talking about Macedonia's EU integration, a review of the process from 2003 to 2009.
Thank you, Marty. It's good to be back again at the Wilson Center after almost 7 years. And I was also happy to see some of the old faces here and just feeling at home. And I was lucky to show around the Othon, the Wilson Center, how it looks like and where it is located. And I'm just feeling at home, and it's really good to be back. And my presentation will be about the case of Macedonia, continuation of the case of Ambassador Grdesic, focus on Croatia. I will also specifically focus on the case of Macedonia. And I will do a bit review of the process of the European integration of the country since the Thessaloniki summit of 2003, which is the benchmark of the conference that we are holding today. And my views are from the field, because I just came from Skopje, and I just came here just for the conference, and I'm going to speak about the Macedonia. Maybe I will throw out some of the issues that are important for the case of Macedonia and its integration to EU. Maybe I may miss some of the picture that you may have from Washington, D.C. and from other places. But maybe I will throw some ideas, and maybe in the discussion we can have more clarity about the situation of Macedonia and overall of its integration to EU. What I will do in the presentation shortly in these 10 or 15 minutes is that I want to say 3 points. First one is that from Thessaloniki summit up to December 2005, Macedonia was a success story because of the various reasons that the performance of the country in that period, and it got the award of its work in December 2005, in December 2005, when it became a candidate country for EU membership. And what comes after, from 2006 up to today, we have not yet achieved as Macedonia the start of accession talks. The date has not been given, and it's still being discussed, and the number of issues are in the agenda that has to be resolved before the date has to be given, although there has been successful recent elections of March, April 2009, which has been a condition for Macedonia to start the accession talks and also maybe the possible visa liberalization for the citizens of the country. And the third point that I want to say is that maybe we are in the point there where Macedonia, as it did in 2005, to resell itself. And I want to try to resell Macedonia in this presentation in a sense, because in December 2005, the major case that was made on the Macedonian integration was that Macedonia is a unique, multi-ethnic, multicultural country, and because of its multi-ethnicity and multiculturality and its relations with the overall idea of the EU, the candidacy was awarded to the country. And this was stated in the declaration of the European Council back in December 2005, saying that the Macedonia has done a lot in terms of the legislative development, in terms of the improvement of the minority rights. And now we are in the process where Macedonia, to a certain extent, is silent, is ambiguous in a sense in terms of its European agenda. And it's a time that Macedonia has to remake its case, whether it is on the basis of what was awarded the candidacy status, or to produce a new case in terms of its success. Because making a case in the history of the European integration has mattered a lot. In terms of the Central European integration, and also let's say, look at also the recent integrations of Bulgaria and Romania, and also Croatia's and Albania's integration into NATO. So the case has to be made, and I will come to that in the end. So what I'm going to do, look into these cases, is I want to look to three levels. First of them is the European agenda, European relations of Macedonia. The second issue that I want to see is the domestic agenda of the country, and also the third thing that I want to see is the Macedonia's foreign policy in its neighborhood, how it is standing in this difficult environment in the north, Kosovo, and in the south, Greece, where it faces a name dispute with Greece, which is a member of EU and NATO. Looking to the European level, what EU has done in the case of Macedonia. Actually, EU has done a lot in various levels. The first level has been the stabilization. EU has been heavily involved in the stabilization of the country since 2001. And also it has been very much involved in terms of consolidating the stability environment in the country after taking over the NATO's military missions in the country, like the military mission Concordia, and then the police mission Proxima, and other projects that have come out from the Council of the EU or from the European Commission. What we have now is that also, this stabilization issue has been finalized in the agenda of the EU on the case of Macedonia. The stabilization is not anymore in the agenda of the EU towards Macedonia, because the perception is that Macedonia as a candidate country should not be the issue for the stability. And as such, the accent is not very much given to the stabilization, but more is given to the various aspects like democratization and association. So as I mentioned, the democratization and association are the two main pillars of the EU involvement in the country. And the second one, the second level, which is democratization, is almost to phase out, because the Ohrid Framework Agreement, to a certain extent, has been implemented legislatively, but still a number of issues are remaining in terms of the enforcement of the provisions of the Ohrid Framework Agreement. Once these issues are resolved, we can say from the EU perspective that the democratization agenda for the country has been resolved. And what is remaining now is the association part of the Macedonia's Europe relations. In a sense, Macedonia's European association aspect of the EU involvement has been the stabilization association process, the signing of the first stabilization association agreement in the region, and December 2005, the candidacy status. The candidacy status, as I mentioned, was awarded due to, the major case was about the multi-ethnicity and multiculturality of Macedonia. But, although the candidate status was awarded due to the difficult environment in Macedonia at that time, awarding the country for major successes and genuine compromises that have been made since 2001, candidacy process has helped a lot in terms of Macedonia's learning of the EU accession process. Candidacy status has allowed Macedonia to be part of the pre-accession assistance of the European Union, which formerly, mainly the pre-accession assistance was given to the countries that have started the accession talks. But the EU was able to put the candidate countries with the status of acquiring and receiving the major financial assistance under the pre-accession instrument of the European Union. And that's why, for example, today Macedonia, which has not started yet the accession talks, but it's a candidate country which is receiving almost all parts, from all components of the IPA assistance, which is a major instrument for assistance of the EU towards the Balkan countries plus Turkey, and is having access to all 5 components of the IPA assistance, which is not the case with regard to the countries that are potential, like Serbia, Kosovo, Bosnia, Albania, and others. Looking to the financial assistance, EU has almost spent around 1 billion euros since independence of the country for the improvement of the, let's say, administration, infrastructure, civil society, private sector. And this financial assistance, although it's perceived as a financial assistance, in a sense being operational, but looking to the cases, the major successes that has been achieved in terms of the assistance that has been provided to Macedonia has helped a lot in terms of the state building of Macedonia, and also in terms of the member state building that was mentioned earlier from Gulnur, and also we can say also in the period of 2001 and 2005, we saw the process of candidate state building in the case of Macedonia. And very much the financial assistance has helped Macedonia to fulfill all these expectations that are coming from Brussels and from the conditionality that are given from the European Commission, which is because the ability of the Macedonian resources to fulfill all the acquis requirements that are there, from environment to agriculture, that are limited. That's why the financial assistance has played a major institutional role in terms of the changes in the country. And what we have seen also in terms of the financial assistance, which in the case has also been, let's say, a tool for state building of Macedonia. We have seen the major support of the EU towards the decentralization process. We have seen major support of the EU towards the civil society, private sector, and also even improvement of the situation in terms of the rule of law and judiciary. And this financial assistance has been very much linked with the conditionality that has been in the agenda of the EU towards these countries, because the conditionality in the case of Balkans have not been in terms and in the model that we have seen from the Central European countries in the enlargement of 2004, or maybe in the enlargement of 2007 with Bulgaria and Romania. We have had also specific conditionalities that have applied for the cases of Balkans and also for Macedonia. And Macedonia's specific conditionality has been very much related about the minority politics and the implementation of the Ohrid agreement. And seeing the process of the candidate state building of Macedonia, EU has developed also major functional relations with Macedonia and with other countries in the region, in the absence of the start of the accession talks, or in the absence of the membership. We have seen, for example, the launch of the Energy Community Treaty. We have seen the launch of the European Common Airspace Agreement, and now we have seen the start of the accession, start of the talks for the signing of the Transport Treaty. In a sense, that European Union helping the situation in the country in terms of the member state building has, in the absence of the membership or in the absence of accession talks, has developed some kind of functional relations, overcoming the difficulties that are there in the specific sectors. But the assumption of the paper that I am presenting is that the structural changes and structural impact, as Ambassador Grdesic mentioned, happens with the membership itself. The functional relations are there, are important, but you see the major changes once the country starts the accession talks or once the country is as a member of the European Union. My second level that I want to discuss is the domestic policy, the domestic political agenda, and how it relates to the issue of the European integration of the country. One of the political challenges are there, and the first one is related with a major political dialogue and the absence of it between the government and the opposition, which has recently improved a lot. And also the second issue is, as I mentioned earlier, is the minority politics, mainly the Ohrid Framework Agreement implementation, and also implementation of some of the major aspects of the Ohrid Agreement, like the equitable representation of minorities, and also the bad intermajority, which is also required for the passing of the laws, which requires the majority of the minorities within the overall majority of the members of the parliament. So what we see in terms of the domestic policy agenda, of Macedonia is that we have seen after the award of the candidate status in December 2005, we have seen the worsened political climate in the country. This happened with the elections of July 2006, where we saw that the government that was formed after the July 2006 elections had very much difficulty in terms of absorbing the minority political agenda in the country. What came after was also the June 2008 elections, which performed very bad in terms of the democratic commitment for the elections in the country. And also what is remaining in the country is that, sorry for my nervousness. And the third issue that I want to mention is the equitable representation of minorities in the wider public administration. I mean, we have seen success of the equitable representation rising in the public administration, tripling the rate from the 4% in 2001 to today in 2007 to 17%, but which is really a bit below from the required majority of the 25%, which is the overall majority of the Albanians in the country. And the final point that I want to mention in terms of the domestic political agenda of the country is the global financial crisis. The global financial crisis has not had let's say, financial impact on the situation of Macedonia as such as a financial crisis. What we have seen the, let's say, worsening economic situation due to various issues. The financial crisis mainly relates due to this fact that I want to mention is that the government, despite the economic difficulties that are there, has continued with its expansionary policies and mainly investments in various cultural and historical issues that have very much deteriorated, let's say, the political climate in the country. And what I want to say in terms of the domestic policy agenda is that recently the issues that are of cultural and historical issues have become very much important in the overall political agenda of the government. And the third issue that I want to mention is the Macedonia's policy in its neighborhood, Macedonia's policy in the Balkans. What we saw in April 2008, Macedonia was not able to get the invitation for EU membership. It was vetoed by Greece due to the name dispute. What happened after April 2008? We saw that the Macedonians became very much suspicious about their neighbors. And this has very much affected the relations with Greece, maybe to a certain extent also halting some of the trade and economic relations that are there, and also maybe affecting other aspects of the relations between two countries. And what we see mainly in Macedonian case on its neighborhood policy is the locality of its policy towards the region. Mainly the focus of the government is more on local aspects rather than on promotion of relations with neighbors, particularly including with Greece. So what we see is, in a sense, Macedonia has been difficulties in improving its relations with its neighbors, which to a certain extent has affected and has led Macedonia to close up itself to the world. So for that reason, we have seen very much criticism from various sides, internally and internationally, about Macedonia becoming, to a certain extent, isolationist in terms of its foreign policy. So what I want to say is that also the current government's perception of the international vote is to a certain extent affecting its let's say, domestic and foreign policy agenda. The perception of the government of the international vote is more Hobbesian. In a sense, there is not much trust of the government towards the international system. More, there is very much reliance on its self-help and on its power. That's why very much we see that the government is not very much putting emphasis on the European Union and NATO policy agenda. And I want to conclude by saying that in the beginning, as I said, Macedonia has to remake its case. At the December 2005, the case was multi-ethnicity and multiculturality. And as I mentioned in some of the points that I referred, I mean, still the case of multi-ethnicity and multiculturality needs to be enhanced. There is still room for improvement in that area. And Macedonian governments, or recent governments, also current government, there is also yet is to make its case on its foreign policy and on its EU integration and NATO integration agenda. Overall, what we have seen from 2006 up to today is that from all these difficulties and challenges that we have been facing in the region, and particularly on the case of Macedonia, Macedonia has exposed internally, internationally, its weaknesses that are there in terms of implementing some of its commitments, whether nationally and internationally, and particularly on the issue of the conditionality of the European Union, whether they are related for the accession talks or for other issues. These were my words. Sorry for being nervous. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Islam. And now our final speaker on our panel is Professor Milica Uvalic, who is a professor of economics at the University of Perugia in Italy. But before that, among other positions, was Vice Minister for Foreign Economic Relations in the first post-Milosevic government and a member of the G17 plus political economic party. So she will be talking about assessing EU policy in the Western Balkans, successes and failures, EU policy.
I need help with my PowerPoint presentation, first of all. Anyway, I don't know the computer. I'm sorry, Nida.
What successes?
Slideshow? Well, I'm extremely pleased to be able to address such a distinguished audience, although I really have a very difficult task. First, because I'm the last speaker just before your lunch, and also because I've been asked to address a very broad topic, the topic of EU policies in the Western Balkans. And of course, many of the things I'm going to say have already been at least mentioned, if not discussed. I'll do my best, however, to fit in all the issues I want to say in the 15 minutes. And of course, a paper will be available shortly on the web of the Woodrow Wilson Center. Now, here we're talking about a region which today is surrounded by EU member states, the Western Balkans. And as has been already stressed, these countries are at very different stages of their EU integration process, where Croatia is actually the only country that is presently negotiating membership, whereas all the other countries are either candidates or potential candidates. I will first say something about EU policies in the region in the 1990s, very briefly. I will pass on to say more about the new EU strategy, which was developed right after the Kosovo conflict. I will stress a few achievements and failures, and finally, we'll address some of the issues for the future. Now, what can we say about EU policies in the Balkans in the 1990s? EU policy was actually very much, of course, shaped by the unfavorable political conditions in the region after the breakup of former Yugoslavia in mid-1991. We had very dramatic consequences, not only 5 military conflicts altogether, but we had sanctions against some of the countries, notably the new Yugoslavia. You had continuous political and economic instability, and this has delayed not only the transition towards market economy and democratization, but also has delayed very much integration with the European Union. The European Union did not have a long-term strategy at that time for the Balkans. It didn't even have a strategy in the second half of the 1990s, although it did try to develop the so-called regional approach through stimulating the countries to cooperate among themselves. And if you look at the programs that the EU has extended to these countries in the second half of the 1990s, you will see that much of the assistance has been in the form of humanitarian aid, military presence, of course, and some trade concessions, but only to selected countries. Coming to the change in the policies of the European Union, they're announced immediately after the end of the Kosovo conflict, and the European Union, in fact, elaborated and launched its so-called Stabilization and Association process, which included several very important elements. First of all, trade opening. The EU offered generous trade preferences to all the countries, whereby, in fact, around 95% of the products that these countries export to the EU are today tariff-free and without any quantitative restrictions. A new EU financial assistance program was launched, the so-called CARDS program, which stands for Community Assistance for Reconstruction, Development and Stabilization, provided some 5 billion euros over the 6-year period. And, of course, most importantly, the SAP offered these countries the possibility of signing stabilization and association agreements, which should eventually lead to EU membership. Parallel with all these initiatives, there was also the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe. We've heard something about one of our previous speakers about it, and that was supposed to mobilize donors' assistance for the war-affected countries, not only the 5 Balkan countries at that time, but also Bulgaria and Romania as 2 countries affected by the Kosovo war in 3 main areas. Now, the speed of EU integration depends, of course, on the country's fulfillment of specific criteria. And here, of course, there are the well-known Copenhagen criteria that have been formulated in 1993 for the Central East European countries regarding political, economic, legal obligations. But also, there are 2 additional criteria for the Western Balkan countries, namely regional cooperation with neighboring countries, plus these countries have to demonstrate that they do fulfill all their international obligations, Dayton, cooperation with the ICTY, and so on. There was an important summit in Thessaloniki in 2003, which actually reinforced the EU strategy towards the Balkans. New instruments were introduced, drawing on the rich experience that the EU has had with Central and Eastern Europe. Not only, but the EU firmly reconfirmed its commitment towards the Balkans. I have to add that in the meantime, 2 important developments in 2 major countries have facilitated this process, namely the political changes in Croatia in early 2000 with the death of President Tudjman, and also the political change, the radical political changes in Yugoslavia with the outthrow of the Milosevic regime. Another point to mention is that in July 2006, a new instrument was adopted by the European Union, the instrument of pre-accession assistance, which actually replaced all the other instruments that were used previously. I will not go into details. I would just like to say that the IPA program should be providing some 3.5 billion euros over the next 6 years, and it has 5 components. But whereas the candidates can use all the 5 components of the program, the potential candidates can only use the first 2. So status with the European Union is extremely important. Of course, there's also been an increased political dialogue, regular meetings, and also joint parliamentary committees for the more advanced countries, Croatia and Macedonia. What can we say about progress to date? What have been the achievements? I'll go through them. Many things have already been mentioned. But I think that if I start with institutional reforms, the EU has served as a blueprint, as a model for ongoing reforms, even before signing a Stabilization and Association Agreement, precisely because there have been numerous technical meetings between the governments of these countries and the EU Commission. Many laws have been adopted in conformity with EU norms. Regarding financial assistance, of course, we're finally seeing some important financial assistance programs helping also institution building in the region, which was not the case before. Regarding contractual relations, of course, there the progress has been slower than anticipated and slower than some countries would have liked to see. But still, by 2008, all the countries have signed a Stabilization and Association Agreement, though, of course, only Croatia and Macedonia at an early stage in 2001. So today, this was already discussed. These countries are at very different stages of EU integration, Croatia being the only country negotiating membership, while the others are Macedonia being a candidate. Albania and Montenegro have already applied for candidate status and membership, while Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina are among the countries which are only potential candidates. Kosovo has a special status under the so-called tracking mechanism, where in fact there have been regular meetings with the EU Commission parallel to their talks with Yugoslavia and later Serbia and Montenegro. Regarding regional cooperation, I think that there has really been steady progress in many areas. Ioannis has mentioned some of them. And one very important achievement has been regional ownership. This has already been stressed. In fact, now, with the transformation of the Stability Pact for Southeastern Europe into the Regional Cooperation Council, which today is managed by the countries themselves, this is certainly one aim that was emphasized from the very beginning. Political agenda. EU integration today is a political priority of all Balkan countries. And in this sense, there have been some important documents in this sense adopted also in a country like Serbia. A resolution on the European Union, the national strategy of integration with the European Union, and so on. You can read more about that in my paper. There is also high popular support of EU integration. And here I disagree with the first speaker at the conference today, because in fact, if you look at opinion polls, you will see that generally the people living in the Western Balkans are in favor very much of EU integration. For example, from at the beginning of 2009, 60 to 70% of Serbian citizens were in favor of EU integration, which is somewhat higher than in some of the more advanced countries. But this is not normal because it's somehow repeating, the history is repeating itself. That was also the case in the Central East European countries. The nearer the countries were to entering the EU, the less support there was. Finally, I have to stress that all along the last 8 years, there has been strong increasing economic integration of all these countries with the EU economy through trade, of course facilitated by the trade opening on the part of the EU, through increasing FDI, which to some countries in the 1990s was practically non-existent, through financial market integration, and through banks. Although somewhat unfortunately at this point, because it is the fact that many banks in the Western Balkans are actually EU banks, banks from EU countries. This is rendering the Western Balkan countries particularly vulnerable to the global financial crisis. What have been some of the main failures? Well, the success of Central and Eastern Europe has not been replicated in the Balkans. Of course, the very obvious reason is that they had very different historical legacies. We must not forget what was happening in the 1990s in the Western Balkans. And there is no doubt that the main reasons for the slow pace of EU-Balkan integration lies with the countries themselves. Many countries are still not fulfilling the necessary conditions. The process has been slow. Institutions building requires time. Some of the norms of the EU, of course, are very complicated. But part of the responsibility certainly lies also with the EU. And here I would like to stress three main points. First, the problems with the EU integration capacity. Now, Othon has expanded on this substantially, so I'll not deal with that. The various problems that the EU is having presently. Second, I do want to stress that the EU conditionality applied for the Western Balkans has been somewhat stricter than with respect to Central and Eastern Europe. The conditions are more numerous. I've already talked about that, but this whole process has been much lengthier. Now, in reference to what was said this morning, that there are four main stages, association, etc., by the first speaker, the Western Balkans, even before being able to sign a stabilization and association agreement, have really had to go through a very burdensome a process of negotiations, feasibility reports, joint consultative task force meetings. Somehow it was very difficult for some countries to actually reach the moment and reach the stage of being able to conclude the stabilization and association agreement. And this important incentive of having the status of association with the European Union to some countries has been offered at a rather late stage, and as is the case with Serbia today, the agreement is actually pending on some of the political conditions. So whereas in the early 1990s, when the Central East European countries declared that they wanted to join and return to Europe, they were actually able to sign association agreements fairly quickly. They were all signed from the end of 91 until 95, except for Slovenia, which had problems with Italy. The whole process is rather more complicated in the case of the Western Balkans. Finally, the third point I want to make is that there are, of course, also a number of country-specific conditions, and I do want to illustrate this by taking the example of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. The EU, after the political changes in 2000, the EU insisted on the maintenance of one country. Then, of course, at that time it was the federation between Serbia and Montenegro. Later on, it became the state union of Serbia and Montenegro. But then it insisted on the harmonization of all economic laws at a time when the economic systems and the laws themselves within Serbia and Montenegro were very different. It was important to harmonize even the foreign trade regime, which at that time was really very different in the two republics. And I would say that at least 3 years have been wasted in useless negotiations and useless insistence on this harmonization and creation of an internal market to see Montenegro and Serbia split anyway. So, coming to the challenges, perhaps I'm running out of time, but this is my last slide. How can we speed up EU-Balkan integration? Of course, this is the session we're going to be assisting after lunch. But I do think that we should reconsider some elements of EU policies. First of all, its conditionality. There is no doubt that political conditionality will continue to be the main instrument in EU hands to implement its desired objectives. But more flexibility in applying some criteria, I think, would be very welcome. As I already mentioned, Serbia's Stabilization and Association Agreement is now pending simply because of the delivery of General Mladic. Now, this is not a question only of political will, but also of government capacity to deliver. I have to mention that it has taken the Italian government 20 years to capture one of the main known mafia leaders, Totorina. He was hiding in Sicily, but they were not able to capture him for a long time. Second point I want to make regards incentives. This was already stressed by the previous speakers. And here I think that one way to really strengthen incentives is to give the visa-free regime to all countries. We will have a special paper this afternoon on these issues. Croatia is the only country that has not been included in the prohibitive visa regime from the very beginning, because that would really be a way to end their 18 years international isolation. Another incentive regards official status. I think it would be wise to promote all the potential candidates into candidates. This would automatically mean also they being able to use all 5 components of this new pre-accession assistance program of the European Union, which would provide more funds also to the main laggards, to the countries that are lagging most behind. In any case, I want to say that I want to end with an optimistic conclusion. Even if EU membership is delayed, certain processes are now irreversible. There's no way that some things that were really looked gloomy just 6-7 years ago can go backwards. Transition is very much on its way. Integration, economic integration is very much on its way. And I do agree with what has been said previously, that today is really a historical opportunity to embrace the Balkans as well, to let them in. The sooner the Balkans do enter the European Union, the better. Only once these countries are in the European Union will the question of borders, status, sovereignty, ethnicity rights really be overcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And from your mouth to God's ear. Now we will have about 15, 20 minutes of discussion. Nida, we can't go over. No. Okay. So that's 15, 20 minutes. Please make your questions or comments short as possible, and identify yourself for the sake of our panel. Who would like to lead off? Oh, no. You're not going to leave it to me. That would be horrible. No one? Okay. Wait.
So maybe just a couple things very quickly. First to Gordon's presentation, which I thought that was really fascinating. It strikes me that you're seeing a variant of this in Central and Eastern Europe as well, where the economic crisis has led countries to try to join the European Monetary Union very quickly. And the EU is not in a position to really move beyond a very rules-based approach to this. They're really hamstrung by a deep tradition of legalism and an extraordinary inability to move off the dime when things are very pressing. And I think that that's also quite a difficult situation to be facing. And then in response to the popular opinion one, I think there's a really important question here, which I'll just put to you in this form. It's true that Serbian numbers are up now, and I gave it my best guess as to why that's happening. But a few months ago, when the numbers were at 64%, which I grant is a credible number,
Which is high.
which is a reasonably high percentage, would you accept that when you ask West European citizens this question, is the EU good for your country, they're answering on the basis of, I see the costs and I see the benefits. In this region, it might be arguable that they're only seeing the benefit side of it, that the costs are not really there. So, for example, when you ask the same Serbian respondents about is Kosovo a reasonable price to pay, the number that say no jumps to almost 3/4 of the population. So yes to membership, but no to the costs of membership. That's my concern, and I wonder if you see it similarly or if you see it very differently.
Well, if you look at these opinion polls concretely for Serbia, they're available on the web of the EU Integration Office, and there have also been some questions posed with regards to cooperation with the ICTY. And there I was myself somewhat surprised to see that about 48% of the population is actually in agreement that the country should cooperate fully with the ICTY. I fully agree, however, what you mentioned before, that the population frequently does not know what the actual costs of EU membership are, precisely because they see it primarily in terms of better well-being, being able to travel to all the EU countries freely. They really do not realize how costly the whole process also of adopting the acquis communautaire and also adopting the whole legislation is going to cost them. Also because there are many things that still need to be done. Countries like Serbia have just concluded only a stabilization and association agreement. And probably it's the duty of the politicians to talk openly about not only the benefits but also the costs, which perhaps has not been done to date.
All right. John.
Yeah, John Lampy, Wilson Center and University of Maryland, and appreciating the panel's comments and Ivan Grdesic's concern about speed up. I think those are points. That's a point well taken. But to perhaps warm up for our lunch discussion here, let me pose a question to anyone who would want to address this, maybe in anticipation of what our speaker would say, and that is, from your point of view, how is U.S. policy toward the Western Balkans proceeding? USAID in particular, which I understand from Ambassador Rieker and Skopje has been extended to 2014. And then also in this support of the EU accession, one area that I know about is just the people who we've been sending to be ambassadors there in the recent years, and it's the top of the list from the State Department. But any other commentary would be welcome.
Who would like to begin?
Just very, very quickly. 3 years, the U.S. was really helpful, especially in our in terms of Croatia, I would say in the matter of our countries, other countries, to all the effort to U.S. aid and other was actually targeted to Croatia's EU accession. And the programs that have been devised in local government, in judiciary, in corruption, in small business enterprises, everything that has been sort of supported through U.S. aid and other funds was very helpful and sort of complementary to other reforms for the European issues negotiation process. I would say in terms of Croatia, the biggest help that we got is NATO. That the reform and the sustainability of the U.S. government in expanding the NATO and helping Croatia through membership action plan and all that was going on through U.S. Adriatic Charter helped the country in that specific sector, which not only security and military, but also human rights, rule of law, civil control of military and everything else, helped the EU prospects of the country. So I think it's something that sometimes we forget that this is sort of a second coin of that transatlantic orientation, that the NATO side. Croatia, as they call it, graduated from U.S. aid. I regret that. I think, well, I understand that priorities and monies need to be sent somewhere else. And we were the easy target to cut that U.S. aid help. But I would like to see the presence of that help in other forms. It doesn't have to be in the U.S. aid form. It can be in extending our scholarly cooperation, expanding Fulbright programs, expanding scientific research, bilateral issues, and others. And I think that Ambassador Bratke is actually doing exactly this on his own initiative most of the time. So I believe that presence that has also been mentioned doesn't have to be only in the form of money. I think just being there, talking and being visible in the region, it's a good sign that there is a partnership that we can count on.
I just want to mention, in a sense, that the feeling what is going on in the Balkans about the U.S. policy towards the region is the feeling, you will, correct me if I am wrong, that's why I am here to learn whether it is correct or not, and we'll hear it during the lunch, is that the U.S. policy towards the Balkans will be of normal nature. You shouldn't expect extraordinary involvement of the U.S. for any issue that is major issue in the agenda of individual countries, whether it is the, let's say, name dispute of Macedonia with Greece, or whether it is Croatia's dispute with Slovenia. And this very much fits into the what I mentioned in my speech, this Hobbesian culture of our government, which is very much relying on its resources and self-help for resolving all the issues that are in the agenda. And I think that very much you will correct me, but this very much fits into the, let's say, in the particular case of Macedonia, this U.S. policy is very much related to the, let's say, ambitions of these small countries, all the Balkans, to showing up to the world that they can make their, they can deal with their order by themselves and contribute internationally to whatever is in the agenda of the U.S. In terms of the USAID, and I think, you are right, USAID mandate was extended, and I think our perception was extended just because Macedonia was not able to get the invitation for NATO membership in April 2008 summit. And I think most probably the USAID engagement was extended because of this joint declaration that was signed between Macedonia and US just after the NATO summit, which expressed US support for the security and stability of the country. What I want to mention in terms of the assistance, the USAID, but we feel in the Balkans and in the case of Macedonia that US government and USAID is very much aware that these countries are on the way for the EU membership, that the EU should drive the process for the assistance, the EU should drive the, let's say, the way how the institutions are designed, and very much if you look to the design of the USAID programs, very much reference is given to the EU pre-accession agenda. And this I want to link with the question that you put to Milica about the costs. In the case of the EU, the costs, almost all the costs of the EU accession is covered by the EU. And that's why this IPA and the CARDS assistance have been there. And if you look to the content of all these programs and projects are related with the specific chapters. If Macedonia is next year to, let's say revise one of the laws on trade, the EU assistance is put in place to help the country to overcome the difficulty. And with this, costs sometimes, to a certain extent and great extent, I think the costs for the EU membership are covered by the EU itself.
Thank you. I know that Gordon has something he'd like to respond to that Milica said.
Okay. If anybody has a question, go ahead and ask the question. But, okay. Just Milica, on the point about progress being irreversible in Southeastern Europe, I hope you're right. I really do. Unfortunately, I'm not so confident. And the reason I say that is because basically you could make a good argument that over the past 20 years, history has changed dramatically twice. First of all in 1989 and second of all on 9/11. Neither time did we really see it coming. So we really don't know what's just around the corner, what might be happening. And especially with respect to Southeastern Europe, there's, I think, two new unknown strategic variables in the region that it's still unclear to me, at least, what the impact of these things are going to be on Southeastern Europe. Number one is what the impact of the global financial crisis is going to be on the region and how that's going to affect politics in Southeastern Europe. And the second unknown strategic variable is the return of Russia to Southeastern Europe. So it's I'd like to wait a couple more years before I would say that things are irreversible in the region.
Okay. I think we've. Oh, you have. Oh.
I'm, as a political scientist, I have to be cautious, as Gordon is. But even if there is a crisis, it will be on the other level of democratic and institutional situation and market situation. This will not be irreversible in terms of reversing the mark of 20 years of the fall of Berlin Wall. We'll have crisis, but that crisis will, I hope, will be prevailed through the constitutional means of these societies. In that sense, I think Milica is right, that people in these countries will not give up on democracy, and I hope so, and I believe so very much.
Thank you.
Well,
Yeah, that's
so do
that's
I.
a little better finish, yeah. Well, before I close this panel, just let me announce that lunch is served across the hall here. It'll be a buffet lunch, and then and you'll hear a keynote address, hopefully on U.S. policy in the region by Jason Hyland, who's Director of Balkan Affairs over there. So now please join, oh, by the way, and please be back here 2:30 sharp in this room for the third panel. Now join me in thanking this panel for doing an excellent job.